see that. Having said so, I think let me say another thing. Our neighbor India, we also have to have through foreign policy interface mechanisms. It is the biggest, I tell you, the third largest polluter of an emitter of the carbon dioxide. If some people will have read even intermediate science or metric in science, they would understand these words very clearly. Nitrogen dioxide, carbon dioxide, CH4, and everything you say, their capacity is now touching around 450,000 megawatts. Out of this, they are producing in terms of the kilowatt hours about 85% of the electricity by coal. Now, the question is that another question arising also, donors are here, they can sort of coordinate with the, across the board donors. We have to also see if that policy of containing the excessive use of coal and in not using the most efficient power plants could become a global reason through WTO or other institutes. I was writing to some of the NGOs that, look, if any country is using coal, it must be based on you try to find out in internet these words are some difficult words like ultra critical coal power plants, subcritical coal power plants, critical coal power plants. So some of the solutions are readily available through imposition of technological standards. For example, about 15 years back in Pakistan, I was talking that transformers installed should have a very big number of efficiencies so that they are also not emitting heat, you see. The problem is that whatever you are generating, eventually it transforms into creating adversities for the environment. I can, on this issue, this is so lovable issue for me. I can talk a lot, but then the problem is that I think others should also have a chance. So let me be fair, but otherwise, hardly when I start talking, I leave, talking. So let me contain over here that we all need to be communicated. We all need to become the ambassadors of transporting the things which we understand, and also the donors, I must say, in terms of making accommodation to central bank, which is more elite capture than anything else, should also extend such, rewards of concessionary arrangements to weaker segment of this society who have captured already, or I would say arranged more than 4,000 megawatts in this country. Having said so, other things is that maybe GIZ in with coordinated efforts through their source generating governments can talk about helping in localization of this production of cells, because presently in our whole layout, the use of alternate or what we call the green energy now is a very, very less. So we have to improve that number. But we have to develop the economics in a way that things flow, Things should start flowing instead of making any imposition. It does not work. You have to create an environment. For example, if you are here, if you can buy some solar panel at a 50% cost of the today, by virtue of its being localized, I'm sure that this, entry will start, and that there will be a time when nobody would be really putting an application for a power connection in this country. Let me tell you, so we have such a abundance available, natural gift for us. So I think I would end here, because otherwise a new topic is coming in my mind in this respect to talk about. So thank you very much for being patient and hearing to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jabbar Saab, for your great interventions. And I'm sure that the audience sitting here and the ones who are joining us online have gained a lot of information and knowledge, and Ms. rightly said that how we could actually prioritize what is required in terms of economic development and look into climate-friendly investments to pave a way forward for sustainable development of Pakistan. With this, I would like to extend my thank you again on behalf of SDPI and GIZ to Engineer Jabbar Sir for joining us this morning. So thank you. I would now quickly give a floor to Hartmut again, who will be giving a training on the State Bank of Pakistan Green Banking Guidelines and the way forward. And he's also joined by two of the colleagues from Germany, who has, if I give a little introduction, who has been employed in the development of these green banking guidelines in the earlier stages, and I think they have a really good knowledge and understanding. So I would also encourage the participants to please come up with some questions while listening, so we could make it as interactive as possible. We would also be getting the questions online. So if I request the online participants to please write your questions in the Q&A sessions, and we'll collect those and we'll try to answer those. So over to you, Hartmut.
Thank you very much. You want me to do from here? Okay, it's better. Okay, thank you very much for giving me again the floor. At first, we should be clear, we cannot do a training now. Unfortunately, what we will do here is to provide the way forward in capacity building on green banking guidelines and on the green financing system. And for that, we just will provide very shortly the contents, what is in the green banking guidelines, not in detail, only the most important ways. And then to discuss how to go forward in cooperation with the state bank, because otherwise it makes no sense for the capacity building. And for this, I'm very happy that Ute Zimmermann and Mehdi Mustafa, they are both online with us to provide input if required. If they say it's everything all right, then we know we go the good direction. But they have been very deeply involved in supporting Pakistan in the first green banking guidelines, 2017, which was really something very new on earth and at that time. And that's why I have so much the hope that we can continue on this train, going together on this train in the future. We are a little bit in the dark where we are currently because the state bank is unfortunately not with us today. You talked about all the problems Pakistan is facing. So we also have to wait until we know that everyone is on board and not every morning plagued by another problem in the first moment. That's also one of the reasons why I do not have a presentation now. I just have some lines written down. And I would like to make quick because also Mrs. Ute Zimmermann and Mehdi Mustafa don't have too much time today. But I would like later to respond very much at what you said about the coordinator, what the coordinator will take up, has already taken up. But I think there are three things which are very important to know. At first, coordinators coordinating on behalf of both of the governments, on the side of the German government, of course, and coordinator is coordinating with the Ministry of Energy and with the Ministry of Climate Change. So we are in contact with them. We will not do anything with if the Ministry of Energy and Climate Change is not okay with them and the German government. So that's my role. We are involved. They are totally involved in everything we are doing. Youth and universities is a very important subject. So I'm very happy to see so many students today here on the table. We started a youth awareness project, which is currently now ending, which we will bring forward with one of our 4 pillars of the climate and energy initiative, which is youth awareness. We know that the younger generation is the one which is suffering from climate change much more. And the government as well is very much convicted to go further in this subject. I like to also point out that this climate and energy initiative is something which Germany offered to Pakistan because we see that we are sitting in one boat. We know that we had a lot of emissions in the past and we still have much more per capita even emissions than Pakistan. We know about this. And this is one thing why we should cooperate and are cooperating. And when we are talking about the emissions, we also should talk about the per capita emissions. India is the third largest emitter, but per capita, I think there's no difference between Pakistan and India. So we have to be very just when we do this. When we're looking at the per capita emissions, Germany is much, much, much higher. US is even much higher, Saudi Arabia is in Australia. But I have a lot more responses later. I would like directly to get into the discussion of the green banking guidelines. Could you also present my Word document? Thank you so much. So to start again, we originally wanted to conduct this training on capacity building of the green banking guidelines with the state bank on board. But in the meantime, Pakistan is confronted with many, many problems, so that the state bank also could not participate today. We talked very clearly about the day-to-day urgencies. Furthermore, we learned yesterday that the green banking guidelines, which had been developed 2017, have already been revised last week. And therefore, the only thing I like to do today is to provide the most important elements of green banking guidelines. Ask our resource persons, Ute Zimmermann and Mustafa, to add and then look forward of how to organize best the training for the commercial, especially for the commercial banks, for the capacity building and development. Because this is indeed the strength. But we learned yesterday also that the IFC of the World Bank is already involved in capacity building. We learned that the GES Bank will get involved. So we need a strong coordination. We have to see where we can, from our climate and energy initiative and from the German corporation, could potentially contribute. To be very clear, our strengths are especially capacity building, capacity development, and Germany, especially the GIZ, is establishing a lot of new tools, methods, mainly concerning climate change. An example is a climate expert, which is adapting the private sector to climate change, or model calculations about what power is needed in addition when we have heat waves like we had it in the past. What are the impacts of climate change on the economy? And with this, I like to come to the most important elements of green banking guidelines. Once again, my request, could you play my Word document? I will start. You will see in short my Word document where I documented the most important. I will later, for the documentation of this workshop and for letting you share all the information, also make a presentation out of this. But this notes I did this morning, very hot, because we did not know where we are and where the state bank would be today. So the green banking guidelines are a first step. Now, further down, this was my, further down, please. Further down. Further down, please. Yes, way forward. Further down. Yeah. Okay, maybe, yeah, way forward, further down, please. Okay, I continue. The most important elements are that the green banking guidelines are first step of a series of inventions leading to sustainable economic environment in the banking sector. They are guiding principles, not prescriptive, and provide an overview of possible action. Further down, please. The objectives of the green banking guidelines are to reduce the vulnerability of the banks, to fulfill responsibility in environmental protection, and to provide finance for transforming the economy to a climate and environment-friendly economy. I just realized it does not work very well with the presentation, so I will slowly talk to let you also note things and to leave the others more in the picture. So the purpose of the guidelines are to provide a policy on green banking for banks, clients, and the whole business environment. It's internal structures and administrative processes that implement the green banking guidelines and assess environmental climate risks. It's a financial mechanism which fits to renewable energies, climate change mitigation, and we yesterday talked about many other sectors which should be involved, like textile industry. It's a system that reduces environmental impacts from the bank's own operations, so they play also a huge role. It involves capacity development and, of course, a periodic review for improving the banking mechanisms and products towards environmental and climate friendliness. That we see that we have every year more knowledge about climate impacts, about banking systems. It's changing in time, so periodically it has to be adopted. The target is to prevent undue environmental climate losses, and therefore the green banking guidelines put in place mechanisms to identify, assess, and mitigate environment and climate risks. And the content, the contents are at first guidelines for the board, management, and the administration. Then we have environmental risk management guidelines, environmental due diligence, where we have to do really the risk assessment of climate impacts, of environmental impacts, which is the biggest challenge, which we already outlined yesterday. Then we have guidelines on own impact reduction and explanations checklists. So I will not and I cannot go into these details because they have been revised, but what we want to engage with the state bank in order to develop a real sensible capacity building, mainly for the commercial banks. And with this, I would like to ask at first Ute Zimmermann if she likes to add something. Mrs. Zimmermann, you have the floor. You change the screen again, take the, yeah. We don't hear you. Can you change please the screen that we see again the participants who are there? Mrs. Zimmermann, we do not hear you. May I ask Mr. Mehdi Mustafa, who has been following this process long time, I think until now, if he likes to provide comments to this, add something to this now.
Not at the moment, Hartmut, no. You're going fine. Once it completes, then we'll see how can we just add to it, if that's okay with you.
This is very okay with me. For me, it was simply important because I'm not an expert on this green banking guidelines to have resource persons in the background if something important is to add. Okay, then, yeah,
Should I add?
yeah.
So may I request IT to please present, this short presentation from my side, and I will give some numbers. So I'll go at the front because
Yeah.
I see there's a number of students from economics background. So there are real numbers where there's a situation of where the opportunity lies in green finance. What are the opportunities and the challenges of green finance in banking sector, and how it could be practiced by commercial banks in Pakistan. So just a moment, and I'll come forward.
Maybe before the presentation is ready, at first, I like to ask you if you have some questions now directly to the green banking guidelines. If not, I like to make the proposal how to go forward. So we, together with the Climate Energy Initiative, together with the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, will engage with the state bank to see how we really can proceed with capacity building. We wanted originally to do it already in 2 weeks' time. We, for the moment, see this is not possible. We see, especially now, after the government changed, after every 2 days, the petrol prices, electricity prices are going up. After we see all the manifestations in Pakistan, that's how you told it very rightly. There are other problems, and we want, if we go ahead, to have them on board. So our idea would be to request at first from them very clearly what are the gaps, what are the needs to cooperate with JS Bank, with IFC, to see what they will do, and then to see what we can do, what are the gaps. And the gaps are mainly what I see for the moment, the green banking guideline, the new ones to do and training on it. But we have many more elements which are important for the green banking, green financing. So with all these elements on board, we like to go forward. And for this, I also like to ask if there are any comments on this in the moment, any questions? Hina, you give me 5 minutes? Okay. And also ask Mehdi Mustafa and Ute Zimmerman if they have comments, recommendations on this. Mehdi?
Yeah. For recommendations or for the sake of discussion, I think participation of State Bank of Pakistan in this process is imperative, of course, because as we have discussed earlier, the document is the ownership is theirs. So and if even if they have revised the document, it's become even more important that their feedback is taken on how to structure the trainings or whatever their support needs are at the moment with the banks, and how in how advanced are they in the implementation of these guidelines in Pakistan. So yes, I think it would be really important to see what the State Bank of Pakistan says in this regard, because before taking that into stock, I would really not jump the ship and say something that probably has little meaning at this point in time.
I'd like to thank you so much for this recommendation, and I can tell that Mehdi was already providing me with all the recommendations how to go forward, for which I thank him very much. We will of course follow them, and of course our principle is the ownership. It has no sense to do anything without ownership. For us, for our advocacy, it's important to clarify that we cannot go forward in the combat against climate change if we cannot access the private financing, which I already told is 80% of the financing to combat climate change. The costs of climate change are getting more and more. So, and for this advocacy, number one in Pakistan is the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. And now you see the secret why we so much like to partner together with them. So we are a strong team together. And Ute Zimmermann, you have some further comments on this?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Oh, wonderful.
now we can hear you very well.
I'm terribly sorry. I had problems in making myself understood. Hello to everybody. I fully agree to what Mehdi just mentioned. We should be very much in line with the needs and the concerns State Bank has. They have been great partners when we established and drafted the green banking guidelines, and the way forward must be we must include their concerns in the way forward. So no more comment from my side.
Could you repeat the last, because we heard the first two sentences of you, and then here at the hotel the internet went down, now it's up again.
Oh, okay, so you seem to have the same problem that I have. I just wanted to reiterate what Mehdi said in terms of ownership. State Bank has been a great partner in this, and they are very much leading the process, and on the way forward, they must be included in any aspect of capacity building or whatever. I'm not in the position to give any other advice than to cooperate with State Bank on this.
So I thank you very much. And I thank both of you also very much for really have taken the opportunity to be with us today. I like to remind you as well, for Ute Zimmermann, when she was online today, when the workshop started at 9:30 in Germany, it was 6:30. So thank you so much. Yeah, for having been with us, and both of them will be with us if we go forward. We will not go any millimeter without the ownership of the State Bank. I know that we will get this ownership thanks to our cooperation with the Sustainable Development Policy Institute and our political partners, which are the Ministry of Climate Change and with the Ministry of Environment, Energy, MOE, could be the both. So with this in mind, we will come to that point where we wanted to be originally today, but we are hard-headed and we are good partners. Thank you so much. And Hina, thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay. So since we are talking about, I'm sure you must be wondering that, of course, we are looking into the State Bank's green banking guidelines, and we do have some revised versions that has just been launched last week, and there needs to be deliberation on it. But of course, the most pertinent points that needs to be made has to come out from the State Bank already. So as I mentioned a couple of times yesterday as well, that please, if you have any specific questions on those guidelines, if the ones we have been through, or you have any previous or for these numbers and for this analysis that I'm going to present. So there are some technical hitches. Just a moment, I'll begin. Right. So this is basically, I'm covering the green financing opportunity in Pakistan. What are the opportunities and challenges for the green finance in the banking sector? And what could be practiced by commercial banks in Pakistan? So this is an analysis done by the IFC on where do we currently stand? Where does the green business opportunity lies? And how do we see in 2030 targets? If we look at the numbers here, we have the population growth of 207.8 million. The demand has to increase by 2030. From GDP 305, GDP growth is expected by 5.83, and total banking asset 166.6 billion. If you're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions, it's around 405 million megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Then the emission ranks, it ranks around 24. For now, we have total installed capacity in terms of 23,000 megawatts. The hydro is 7,000, installed renewables 1,135. That is the data of 2016. Solar 400, then wind, and then bio. So you see very small share in some of the renewables. If we go down into the business opportunity in terms of renewable sector, the green building, electric vehicles, solid waste, water, and agriculture. So there's 41.5 billion has to be in renewables, 90 billion in the green building, 41.7 in the electric vehicles, 6.4 in the solid waste, 7.5 in water, and 10 in the agriculture. So you see the amount of financing we required for this to implement the practices that needs to have to carry out these sectors. In terms of renewables, the opportunity that lies is to help the significant power supply demand gap in Pakistan, that is around 10 gigawatt, and to promote the use of renewable energy sources in terms of 18 gigawatt installed capacity potential in the renewable energy. In terms of green building, the market size has to be 300 billion financing potential is recognized in the residential sector, and 30% for the GB adoption. And the estimated housing shortage in Pakistan is up to around 10 million units, and the deficit continues to grow. For the electric vehicles, as we know, we have a policy where we aim to increase the share of 30% renewables by 2030. So the adoption in total car sales in 2030 is around 30%, 90% in 2040. In terms of 50% electrical vehicle adoption in 2030, and by 2040, in terms of the electric buses for till 2040. And 30% electric trucks adoption is expected in 2030 and 40% in 2040 in the charging infrastructure. So considering all these, there's an opportunity, green business opportunity of around 41.7 billion. In total, if you look at all the numbers, it's around $200 billion. It's a huge amount of money that is required. Then we had many questions coming from the solid waste side. As yesterday, we had some participants. So as we all know that the solid waste management needs to be strengthened. So we see 30 million tons of the solid waste generate every year, which with around 2% of annual growth rate. And the primary approach that is being used is the landfill. But waste to energy and recycling are still untapped. And these are some of the aspects that we look into, and some participants came up with what could be the alternative ways to carry out for the solid waste management. So this is an opportunity that is still untapped, and of course, the ones that are being explored. For water, the crisis that we all know of, about 308 million tons of municipal and 185 million M3 of industrial wastewater is generated annually, and only 10% is treated. Only 36% of the population has an access to safely managed drinking water. That would require almost 7.5 billion of investments to be able to carry out the green practices in the sector. Then again, agriculture, where we need to improve the irrigation, the water management using the climate smart agriculture technologies, implement the agroforestry practices through the plantation and growing rice species, 10 billion. These are some of the numbers that I've taken from the IFC report, and the source is given at the end, where we have the numbers, and also there's a country snapshot that has been taken from the World Bank analysis that all puts together and gives a kind of an overall picture of how we are looking into the green business opportunity and how it could benefit. The main target, as we know, to reduce the 20% in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and increase in the forest cover from 6 to 10% by 2030. So there are some, of course, recommendations which were provided based on the analysis that we see here. So for the green industry, as we see industrialists and practitioners and the banking from the commercial banks are all sitting here. So there has to be an off-grid access to energy solutions now to clean energy, and the efforts is being focused, needs to be focused on distribution, transmission, and renewable energy, as they pose a major challenge to the sector. Then the second recommendation is supporting the local banks to provide sustainable long-term financing for the development of renewable energy projects in Pakistan. The third one is on building green buildings, green electric vehicles, awareness, and green certifications. Also, in terms of the agriculture sector, increased yields of crops by using the climate smart agriculture practices, irrigation schemes, and also with improving a lot of water management to improve the productivity and manage the water crisis that we are facing. So that's a kind of an overall picture of where we currently stand. Where does the opportunity lies when we are talking about climate friendly investments and climate finance? How are we going to look at in 2030? Because if you see our climate targets of NDCs, we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030, including the emissions from all these sectors, agriculture, land use, waste. So it carries a lot of information on how we could actually pave a way forward. So if I go back to the opportunities and challenges of the green finance in banking sector, so we see, as I mentioned earlier, as per the data, the most recent data of 2016 I have, the total asset value is 166.6 billion. That is where we currently stand. 31 banks, 5 public banks, 4 foreign banks, and 22 private banks. And the majority of the banking business is concentrated in the largest 6 commercial banks. And the NPL remain high, around 7.97, and concentrated in the largest commercial banks. The largest bank has a total asset of more than 9 billion, and that includes 6 banks with 59% of banking asset base. In terms of medium banks, there's a 1.5 billion to 9 billion of assets available, and it has almost 15 banks and 37% banking asset based. Of course, we do have some colleagues here sitting here from the banking, and they would have some updated data on these portfolio, and probably could be shared with the participants later. But this is something that I have gathered to share the knowledge that what we already have in our portfolio, in our bucket. In terms of opportunities, if you look at the banking sector overall, so there is a growing demand in the energy sector that is increasing to 17% of total lending, that is in 2018. So iron, textile, cement industry have huge potential in investing and in looking into the energy efficiency practices. And as we are all aware that the environmental challenges by poor air conditioner and deteriorating water situation needs to be looked at, and that's where we need to put our efforts in. In terms of challenges, the major challenge that has been identified here in terms of State Bank of Pakistan should issue a green directive in a clear and concise manner to guide the banks to develop green businesses. So their lack of guidelines for issuing green bonds as well. We have heard from the German colleagues, from the EU colleagues on their experiences of the green bonds. Pakistan has also launched a green bond by WABDA. But in terms of in terms of capacity building on how these guidelines could be implemented or could be developed to develop green businesses, we need to look at. Recommendation, of course, the upstream work is required for the green standards and the green bond issuance guidelines that needs to be there. And if we had yesterday representatives from SVP, from SCCP, from Pakistan Stock Exchange, so lots of information that these recommendations that we have already have an update on, and of course will be put forward. In terms of the large banks, so there's a growing investment opportunity in renewable energy, in air and water pollution control projects by large corporates. So existing corporate clients, let's say iron and textile industry, energy efficiency and pollution control opportunities has to be recognized and is being recognized. So in terms of challenges, the lack of bank level green strategy aligned with the state bank needs to be there. So that's a challenge that we are facing. And when we speak with the stakeholders sitting in the banks, in terms of capacity, in terms of their institutional workshop, institutional capacity, they need to have the people with the right set of background and information to promote the green finance in the banking sector. Of course, based on what I've just discussed and the lack of expertise. So with the lack of expertise, there needs to be skills training, skill-based training, more knowledge-based information and trainings on how to develop the green business and asset environmental risks in the banking sector. Also, there is a lack of sustainable long-term financing for the development of renewable energy projects in Pakistan, but the opportunities are arising, as we also heard from our colleagues from PFAN, UNIDO, who are financing these small-scale renewable energy investments and by US aid. Then also lack of knowledge and expertise to recognize the opportunities in SMEs and helping them to maintain their business by complying with the green. So again, it links up to what we had. We had a presentation yesterday on how they are playing their role in bridging this gap of how the expertise and the knowledge can be harnessed to upscale the green business opportunity in SMEs. In terms of recommendations, of course, we have the IFC Green Commercial Bank framework. There needs to have green finance strategy and system. IFC certificate training is there, and sustainable energy financing in terms of innovative models. There are again IFC certificate trainings that could be done, and the greening standards, rating standards for SMEs. These are some of two examples that I have from, this is what I've taken from the MCB Bank website, and there's the examples of the two banks. Bank Al Falah is the fifth largest private bank with an asset of 9.1 billion, with a 6% market share and 650 branches. The initiatives that they have taken so far is integrating the environmental and sustainable criteria it's into in lending and investment decision-making processes. And also it's a strong proponent of renewable energy with green mortgages to housing and to increase access to energy. Also in terms of energy projects, a term finance facility for customers willing to install solar energy equipment for the generation of electricity ranging from 4 kilowatts to 4 kV to 1000 with the net metering. They are in partnership with IFC since 2019, and there has been a diagnostic assessment on green business facilitation while developing renewable energy financing products and services to facilitate a reduction in the carbon footprint. If you look at the MCB, it's also one of the top 6 largest banks in Pakistan with an asset of 10.4 billion US dollars. Of course, many branches. So MCB has established the Green Banking Office, and with the help of European Union, and they also have environmental due diligence, which has been made part of the bank's overall assessment of a borrower. It's an area of digital banking services been introduced by the bank and is opting ways to eliminate and reduce the consumption of paper in everyday business and everyday operations. Also, there is a deployment of solar power systems in some branches. There's a recycling of waste generated from its offices. Also, they have initiated green awareness campaigns for all employees, and no-cost own impact reduction measures have been initiated. Also, regular trainings are conducted for the capacity building of bank staffs. So the highlights are that it is cognizant of its national obligation to safeguard against environmental vulnerability and playing its due role in transforming the country towards a low carbon and climate resilient economy through the implementation of their BOD's approved green banking policy under the SPP's green banking guidelines, and also the green loan with preferential interest and financing up to 100% of the investment and repayment between 4 to 10 years. So these are two of the examples, and of course we have colleague from here from the GS Bank. If I could request you, Ali, if you would like to elaborate on what GS Bank has in portfolio, that would be helpful for the participants to. Has Ali left? Okay, so Ali Hassan was here, who is heading the sustainable initiatives at GS Bank, and they have recently been accredited by the Green Climate Fund, and they have also these similar policies where they have incentives to promote the green technologies and renewable energy technologies on the banking side under the SPP's green banking guidelines. So this was all from my side. I just thought that it's very helpful to understand that where we stand, where the opportunity lies, and where the banks are making an effort, where it needs to be done. Of course, the challenges, there are many challenges in the implementation that everybody's looking into, but the challenges are addressed once known, and we all need to make a collective effort. So we at SDPI, we have this network for clean energy transition in Pakistan, where we have representation from public, private, academia, CSOs, so all the private businesses, investors who are part of the network, and in collaboration with the other forums like Climate Energy Initiative of German Corporation and some coalitions who are working in this domain, we are trying to tap in all these important topics that needs to be understood and to have a capacity around. So all of you sitting here and all of the participants who have joined us online, I am sure you have gained a lot of knowledge today on the information we have shared, and I'm sure that you will have a lot of questions. Again, like I said, since we cannot speak on the behalf of SPP, but we are definitely put you through, and we are continuing this engagement even after the workshop. So all of your emails and information we have already, and we'll be communicating all the information that is required. Please keep in touch with us. Keep sending us your questions, your queries that we can connect to relevant people. That's what the network is all about. That's what the initiative is all about. So thank you so much for giving me this time to be able to present you this a little work that I think is very useful for you. Thank you. Sorry, and we break for coffee. So there's a break here. Come back after 15 minutes. Thank you.
COVID-19 has highlighted the crisis posed by the decimation of the global economy through a natural disaster. If countries do not move away from their business as usual activities and non-compliance to the climate goals, the level of economic disruptions will be far more elevated. The backdrop of COVID-19 have supported green recovery for many countries that entered the crisis with already high debt levels. Assist developing nations in their war against climate change. Countries and businesses are looking for net zero targets by cutting carbon. COP26 can facilitate the challenges, innovations, and opportunities.
The event is the Planet Budapest 2021 Sustainability Expo and Summit. In fact, this is not one event. In fact, this is a series of events consisting at least 4 different events. Namely, the summit itself, the Sustainability Expo, and interactive public programs about sustainability, and a youth program about sustainability. The summit will allow heads of state and heads of governments, also important decision makers, experts, and company representatives to share their insights on these matters, along with tens of thousands of visitors. These series of events will make the Planet Budapest 2021 the largest international event in Central Europe dedicated to sustainability and the future of the world.
I would like to give some remarks about this Planet Budapest. As we know that there is no Planet B. This is the only planet that we have got, and it's up to us whether we save it for our future generations, a livable planet, or we want to leave our future generations in a planet with no water, with no natural resources, with no fresh air to breathe, with no oxygen, and full of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, ozone layer gases. To me, this initiative is very timely, and it has a macro implication and it has a meso and a micro implication. The macro implication is that this summit is being hosted straight after COP26, which would be held in Glasgow from 31st of October to 12th of November. 195 countries, they would gather there, they would make their pledges for ecosystem restoration, for curbing the carbon dioxide emission and increase in temperature to pre-industrial level. So right after that, this summit, that would provide some sort of practical guideline and way forward. So if in Glasgow, the international community would be meeting to discuss theory of climate change, I can see that the expo here, it would give us some practical guidance on how to adopt some of the things that we have been discussing in Glasgow as part of our NDC's nationally determined contributions to reduce carbon dioxide emission.
I kindly ask His Excellency Béla Fazekas and Dr. Abid Qayyum Suleri to hand over the certificate to the winner of the essay writing competition, Miss Fatma Baksam.
First of all, thank you so much. Like I was saying before, there's an American proverb that I believe in very wholeheartedly, and it goes that we don't inherit the world from this earth from our ancestors, rather we borrow it from the future generations. So we need to live here like we have to give it in a good, at least we need to give it in a better position than we found it, right? So this is something I truly believe in. The essay topic that I selected, waste management, that was something that I very strongly believe in, because living in Islamabad, I expected, you expect the capital city to be really clean and really developed and all of that. Still, the waste management problem is very high here. You see littering all around, even the educated people are seeing littering. They don't take care of that very much. This was something that needs to be taken urgent care, especially in Pakistan. People need to be more responsible toward the planet, toward this earth. Obviously, they just don't have to clean the home. That is the perspective that needs to change, that the whole earth is your home and you need to take care of it all together. And obviously, one by one, when we join hands, we can make a better world together. And inshallah, that is the whole point of this Planet Budapest as well.
Does the panel think that COP26 has brought us closer to the climate or closer to the climate disaster? What do you think? Is it a failure or a progress? And what are the demerits and the merit of this COP26 and the way forward?
Well, we know that in the global diplomacy, things they don't move that easily, and especially on climate change, things they creep. But the mere fact that COP26, it was the 26th congregation of nations to discuss the solutions and way out from climate change. In itself, it was quite encouraging. And the panel here, I think they were of the same opinion that although there was a glass half full, but we should focus on the half full part of the glass and try to pour more water so that its level increases.
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. آج ہم اپنے پروگرام کے ساتھ جو ہے وہ احسن اقبال صاحب جو کہ سیکرٹری جنرل ہیں پاکستان مسلم لیگ نون کے اور بڑا وسیع پارلیمانی تجربہ رکھتے ہیں اور لوکل باڈی سسٹم پر بھی پی ایم ایل این کے حوالے سے ان کا موقف جو ہے وہ ہم جانیں گے کہ پی ایم ایل این جو ہے وہ یہ جو ریفارمز ہونے جا رہی ہیں اور اس میں لوکل باڈیز کے جو تینوں ٹیئرز ہیں کونسلز ہیں ان میں بہتر کوارڈینیشن ٹرانسپیرنسی اور اس کو امپاور کرنے کے حوالے سے پی ایم ایل این جو ہے وہ کیا نقطہ نظر رکھتی ہے. ہم ویلکم کرتے ہیں جناب احسن اقبال صاحب کو اور جاننے کی کوشش کرتے ہیں کہ احسن اقبال صاحب یہ فرمائیے کہ بحیثیت سیکرٹری جنرل پاکستان مسلم لیگ نواز آپ کیا سمجھتے ہیں کہ لوکل باڈی سسٹم جو ہے وہ کتنا مؤثر اور بہتر ہونا چاہیے تاکہ عوام کی سروس ڈلیوری جو ہے اس میں امپرومنٹ آ سکے؟
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. دیکھیے سب سے پہلے تو میں یہ کہوں گا کہ کوئی بھی ڈیموکریٹ یا کوئی بھی انسان جو جمہوریت پہ یقین رکھتا ہو اسے جمہوریت کے تینوں ستونوں کو تسلیم کرنا پڑتا ہے. جمہوریت کی جو عمارت ہے اس کا پہلا ستون بلدیاتی ادارے ہیں یا مقامی ادارے ہیں. اس کے بعد پھر صوبائی فیڈریٹنگ جو یونٹس ہیں اس کی منتخب اسمبلیاں ہوتی ہیں اور اس کے اوپر پھر قومی اسمبلی اور سینٹ پارلیمان آتی ہے. اور اگر ہم مقامی حکومتوں کو یا لوکل باڈیز کو پنپنے کا موقع نہیں دیں گے تو جمہوری نظام ہوا کے اندر معلق ہوتا ہے اور اس کی کبھی جڑیں عوام تک نہیں پہنچ سکتی اور جو مقامی عوامی مسائل ہیں ان کو حل کرنے میں بھی وہ کوئی مؤثر کردار حکومت کوئی بھی ہو ادا نہیں کر سکتی. لہٰذا مستقبل میں جمہوریت کی کامیابی کا میرے نزدیک 100% دار و مدار مقامی حکومتوں کی کامیابی اور ان کی مضبوطی پر ہے. جتنی وہ مؤثر ہوں گی اتنی سروس ڈلیوری بہتر ہوگی، اتنی عوام کے مقامی مسائل بہتر حل ہوں گے اور اگر ان کے مسائل بہتر حل ہوں گے تو ان کا جمہوری اداروں پر اعتماد اور یقین بڑھے گا.
جی اس میں بہت دفعہ یہ دیکھا گیا ہے کہ جو صوبائی حکومتیں اسپیشلی 18th امینڈمنٹ کے بعد صوبائی حکومتیں جو ہیں وہ لوکل باڈی سے جو ہے وہ بڑی متنفر نظر آتی ہیں اور وہ ایک ان سے جو ہے وہ عدم تحفظ کا شکار رہتی ہیں. تو اس کا آپ نے یہ دیکھا کہ گزشتہ ادوار میں ہم نے بہت سے تجربے کیے اور جو جب بھی کوئی تالا آزمات ہوں تو اس کا فیوریٹ کیک جو ہے وہ جمہوری ادارے ہوتے ہیں اور وہ سمجھتا ہے کہ اس کا مینڈیٹ جو ہے وہ جمہوری اداروں کے ذریعے اسٹرینتھن ہو سکے. تو آپ بحیثیت ایک سیاسی جماعت کے رہنما کے طور پر یہ فرمائیے کہ صوبائی حکومتوں کو جو تھریٹ ہوتا ہے لوکل باڈی سسٹم سے کیسے نکالا جا سکتا ہے اور ایک سموتھ میکنزم جو ہے وہ کیا ہو سکتا ہے؟
دیکھیے پہلی چیز تو میں یہ کہوں گا کہ ماضی میں سب کو شکایت ہوتی تھی کہ مرکز بہت اختیارات ہیں اس کے پاس اور ہمارا جو نظام ہے وہ اوورلی سینٹرلائزڈ ہے. اور پھر جب 18ویں ترمیم ہوئی تو مرکز نے بہت سارے فنکشن صوبوں کو دے دیے. اب اس وقت صورتحال یہ ہے کہ صوبے اوور سینٹرلائز ہو چکے ہیں اور صوبوں کی کیپیسٹی نہیں ہے کہ وہ اتنے اختیارات کو بخوبی ڈسچارج کر سکیں اور عوام تک سروس ڈلیوری کر سکیں. اس لیے ڈیولوشن کا جو 18ویں ترمیم میں ہوئی منطقی اس کا اگلا قدم یہ تھا کہ صوبوں سے مقامی حکومتوں تک ڈیولوشن کرتے، ڈیوالو کرتے، ڈی سینٹرلائز کرتے، اضلاع کے اوپر جو حکومتیں ہیں ان کو مؤثر کرتے. لیکن صوبوں نے اب اپنے آپ کو اوورلی سینٹرلائز کر لیا ہے اور وہاں پہ میرے نزدیک جو بیوروکریسی ہے وہ نہیں چاہتی کہ ان اختیارات کو وہ نیچے کی طرف تفویض کرے، چونکہ ان کے پاس پورے صوبے کے اختیارات ہیں، پوسٹنگز ہیں، ٹرانسفرز ہیں، بجٹس ہیں، تو وہ چاہتے ہیں کہ ان کو وہ استعمال کریں. تو میرے نزدیک اس میں پولیٹیکل پارٹیز کا فرض ہے کہ وہ ایک چارٹر کے اوپر اتفاق کریں کہ ہم کس طرح مؤثر لوکل گورنمنٹس کو بنائیں گے. اور ایک جو چپکلش ہے ہمارے سسٹم میں وہ یہ ہے کہ جو حکومتیں آتی ہیں وہ لوکل باڈیز کو اون نہیں کرتی. میرا خیال ہے کہ اس کا ایک حل یہ ہو سکتا ہے کہ ہم آئین میں یہ ترمیم کریں کہ لوکل باڈیز کے انتخابات بھی عام انتخابات کے سائیکل کے ساتھ سنکرونائز ہو جائیں. تو اس کے بعد یہ ہوگا کہ جو بھی حکومت آئے گی وہ مکمل طور پہ لوکل باڈیز کو اون کرے گی اور اس کے سائیکل کے ساتھ ہی ان کا ٹینیور ختم ہوگا. تو ایک اچھا ہارمونیس ریلیشن شپ ان تمام اداروں میں بن جائے گا.
فائنینشیل اٹانومی کے حوالے سے لوکل باڈیز کو ہمیشہ تحفظات رہے ہیں اور کوئی پراپر جو ہے وہ اس کا میکنزم نہ ہونے کی وجہ سے ان کا خیال ہوتا ہے کہ ہم کام نہیں کر رہے، ڈیولپمنٹ ورک جو ہے وہ اس طرح سے نہیں ہو رہا جس طرح منتخب نمائندگان چاہ رہے ہیں. تو آپ کے نزدیک اس کا بہتر حل یا سلوشن کیا ہو سکتا ہے؟
دیکھیے، ہمارے مرکز میں تو نیشنل فائنانس کمیشن موجود ہے جس کے ایوارڈ کے ذریعے وفاقی وسائل جو ہیں وہ صوبوں میں تقسیم ہوتے ہیں. کاغذوں کے اندر صوبوں کے اندر بھی پروونشل فائنانس کمیشن ہے، لیکن وہ اس قدر مؤثر نہیں ہے. میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ پروونشل فائنانس کمیشن کے اندر لوکل باڈیز کے نمائندوں کو مؤثر نمائندگی ہونی چاہیے اور ایک منصفانہ تقسیم ہونی چاہیے وسائل کی صوبوں کے اندر، تاکہ لوکل باڈیز جو ڈیولپمنٹ اسکیمز ہیں، عوامی مسائل ہیں، ان کو حل کرنے کے لیے اپنا کردار ادا کر سکیں. اسی طرح جو چیز ہمارے ملک میں کمی ہے وسائل کے حوالے سے، وہ یہ ہے کہ ہماری صوبائی حکومتیں اور لوکل باڈیز نے اپنے ٹیکسیشن کے نظام کو بھی نہیں ڈیولپ کیا، کہ جو سروس ڈیلیوری کے حوالے سے لوگوں کو آپ کچھ فیس چارج کر سکتے ہیں یا ٹیکس ریونیو لے سکتے ہیں، اس کی کیپیسٹی بھی نہیں ہے. تو میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ اس کے لیے ضروری ہے کہ ہم لوکل باڈیز کی جو فائنینشیل مینجمنٹ ہے اور جو ان کی ریونیو جنریشن کیپیسٹی ہے اس کو بڑھائیں، تاکہ وہ مقامی طور پہ بھی اپنے لیے وسائل پیدا کر سکیں اور دوسرے صوبے سے ان کو ایک منصفانہ شیئر ملے.
جی جناب، اس میں ایک اور چیز جو ہے وہ بڑی رہتی ہے کہ جہاں فنڈز کا معاملہ آتا ہے، سروس ڈیلیوری کا معاملہ آتا ہے، وہاں ٹرانسپیرنسی جو ہے اور اختیارات کی تقسیم کی جو ہے وہ بہت زیادہ بات کی جاتی ہے، اور اس پر جو ہے وہ صوبائی حکومت جو ہے وفاقی حکومتوں سے اور وفاقی حکومتیں صوبائی حکومتوں سے اور پھر مقامی حکومتیں آپس میں جو ہے وہ ایک سما خراشی کا جو ہے وہ رویہ رہتا ہے. تو اس کے لیے پی ایم ایل این جو ہے وہ کیا سوچتی ہے کہ اس کو کیسے امپروو کیا جا سکتا ہے تاکہ کنفلکٹ آف انٹرسٹ جو ہے وہ نہ ہو سکے؟
دیکھیے، اس کا تو سب سے مؤثر طریقہ یہی ہے کہ یہ تمام ادارے آپس میں ایک کنسنسس کے ساتھ سسٹمز ایوالو کریں، اور اس سسٹم میں جو کم سے کم آپس میں کانفلکٹ ہونا چاہیے، ہارمنی ہونی چاہیے. دوسری بات یہ ہے کہ جو وسائل کا مصرف ہے اس کے لیے ہمیں صوبوں کی سطح پہ، مرکز کی سطح پہ، مقامی حکومتوں کی سطح پہ شفافیت لانے کے لیے جو ڈسکریشنز ہیں انہیں ختم کرنا چاہیے، اور زیادہ سے زیادہ ٹرانسپیرنسی لانی چاہیے کہ جو ڈیولپمنٹ اسکیمیں ہیں، جو ان کے جو ٹینڈرز ہوتے ہیں، جو ان کی پروکیورمنٹ ہوتی ہے، اس کو ڈیجیٹل ٹیکنالوجی کے ذریعے آن لائن لے کر آیا جائے. لیکن اس کے ساتھ میں یہ کہوں گا کہ سول سوسائٹی کا بہت اہم رول ہے، اور ہمیں ایسے واچ ڈاگز چاہیے کہ جو اکراس دا لوکل باڈیز یہ دیکھیں کہ جو پروکیورمنٹ ہو رہی ہے، جو ڈیولپمنٹ ایکٹیویٹیز ہو رہی ہیں، ان کے کیا اخراجات آ رہے ہیں. میں آپ کو ایک مثال دیتا ہوں. ہم نے ایک زمانے میں مختلف صوبوں میں ایک اسٹڈی کرائی کہ جو کاسٹ آف سروس ڈیلیوری ہے وہ کیا ہے. ایک بچے کو میٹرک کی تعلیم کرانے میں ایک صوبے میں کیا تعلیم خرچ آتا ہے، دوسرے میں کیا، تیسرے میں، چوتھے میں کیا. ایک صوبے کے اندر جو ہاسپٹل کی بیڈ شیٹ ہے وہ خریدنے کی کیا لاگت ہے ایک سیم کوالٹی کی. تو مجھے یاد ہے کہ کچھ اس طرح تھا کہ اگر کسی ایک جگہ پہ وہ 500-600 کی تھی تو دوسرے صوبے میں اس کی قیمت کوئی 1100 تھی، ایک تیسرے صوبے میں اس کی قیمت 2500 تھی، اور اسی بیڈ شیٹ کی قیمت ایک اور صوبے کے اندر کچھ 4,500-5,000 تھی. اب یہ جو ڈسکرپنسی ہے اس کو اگر دیکھا جائے تو یہ اختیارات کا ناجائز استعمال ہے، اور یہ نان ٹرانسپیرنٹ پروکیورمنٹ ہے کہ جس میں اگر ایک صوبے میں وہی بیڈ شیٹ 500-600 کی آ رہی ہے، دوسری جگہ 4,500 کی آ رہی ہے، تو یہ تو صاف ظاہر ہے کہ وہاں پہ بہت گھپلا ہو رہا ہے. تو اسی طرح اگر جو لوکل باڈیز ہیں ان کی بھی میرا خیال ہے کہ کارکردگی کو جانچنے کے لیے ہمارے پاس ایسے واچ ڈاگز ہونے چاہیے جو یہ دیکھیں کہ مختلف جو لوکل باڈیز ہیں وہ اپنی پروکیورمنٹ، ان کی پریکٹس کیا ہے، ان کی جو ڈیولپمنٹ اسکیمز ہیں ان کی لاگت، ٹینڈرز کیسے ہو رہے ہیں، ان کے اخراجات کس تناسب سے ہو رہے ہیں. تو یہ جو کمپیریزن ہے اس کی رپورٹس اگر بنائی جائیں اور سال کے آخر میں یہ سب کا پبلک اکاؤنٹیبلٹی ہوگی کہ آپ نے کیسے مصرف کیا، کتنے ایفیشینٹ تھے آپ اپنے ریسورس ایلوکیشن یا یوٹیلائزیشن کے اندر. تو اس سے میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ کافی
سر
فرق
اس
پڑ
میں
سکتا ہے.
اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کا جو میکنزم ہے کیا وہ کہاں کس سطح پر ہونا چاہیے؟
دیکھیے
ایسے سوالات
یہ ایک بہت ٹکلش سوال ہے، اس لیے کہ اگر آپ اس کی اوور اکاؤنٹیبلٹی صوبوں میں دے دیں گے تو صوبے انہیں چلنے نہیں دیں گے. اگر کوئی ہمارے ہاں جو سیاسی ناچاکی یا سیاسی پسند ناپسند کا سوال ہے تو اس میں صوبے پولیٹیکل بیسس پہ لوکل گورنمنٹس کو ڈسمس کر سکتے ہیں. ابھی آپ دیکھیے پنجاب میں کیا ہوا ہے کہ تقریباً 58,000 منتخب بلدیاتی نمائندوں کو صرف سیاسی ناپسند ہونے کی بنا پہ ڈسمس کر دیا گیا، اور تقریباً 30 مہینے سے وہ عدالتوں کے دھکے کھا رہے ہیں، اور پنجاب کے اندر لوکل باڈیز جو ہیں وہ غیر مؤثر ہیں، غیر فعال ہیں. تو اس طرح ہمیں احتیاط کا دامن ضرور رکھنا چاہیے کہ ایسا نہ ہو کہ ہم کوئی ایسی اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کا اختیار دے دیں. مثال کے طور پہ اگر صوبائی حکومت کسی کے خلاف کوئی کارروائی کرتی ہے تو پھر اسے بجائے یہ کہ انتظامی اختیار بنایا جائے، اس کے لیے لازم ہونا چاہیے کہ وہ اس کا ایک ریفرنس بنا کے عدالت میں پیش کرے کہ جی یہ ہمارے پاس ثبوت ہے، اس نے کرپشن کی ہے، یہ مس گورننس کر رہے ہیں، اس لیے ہم اس لوکل گورنمنٹ کو ڈسمس کر رہے ہیں. وہ ایک لوکل گورنمنٹ کی اومبڈسمین ہو سکتا ہے. لوکل گورنمنٹ کے حوالے سے ایک خصوصی عدالت بنائی جا سکتی ہے جو لوکل گورنمنٹس کی اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کے حوالے سے شکایات کو دیکھے اور جانچے. لیکن اگر یہ ایگزیکٹو ڈومین میں ہوگا تو اس بات کا خدشہ موجود رہے گا کہ یہ مس یوز ہوگی اتھارٹی.
اچھا احسن صاحب یہ فرمائیے کہ ہمارے چاروں صوبوں کے جو مقامی پولیٹیکل ڈائنامکس جو ہیں ان میں فرق ہے، جیسے کے پی ہے، بلوچستان ہے، سندھ ہے، پنجاب ہے. تو پھر ہمارے جو دیہی علاقے ہیں ان کے نارمز کچھ اور ہیں، وہاں پہ ریکوائرمنٹ کچھ اور ہوتی ہیں. تو اس حوالے سے آپ کیا سمجھتے ہیں کہ پی ایم ایل این جو ہے اس کے پاس کیا اسٹریٹجی ایسی ہوگی تاکہ سب لوکل کونسلز جو ہیں ان کو انٹیگریٹ کیا جا سکے اور ان کی امپرومنٹ جو ہے وہ سروس ڈیلیوری میں ہو سکے تاکہ وہ اچھے طریقے سے پرفارم کر سکیں؟ اور دوسرا اس میں یہ کہ اس میں فردر وفاق اور صوبے اس کو کس طرح اسٹرینتھن کر سکتے ہیں تاکہ وہ انڈیپینڈنٹلی اپنا رول جو ہے وہ پلے کر سکیں؟
دیکھیے ابھی تک جو ایک ہمارے سامنے تجربہ ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ ہماری جو انتظامیہ ہے وہ لوکل گورنمنٹ سے بہت خائف ہے، اور وہ اپنے اختیارات کو بہت سختی کے ساتھ پروٹیکٹ کرتی ہے، اور وہ نہیں چاہتی کہ لوکل گورنمنٹ سے اختیارات لیں. لیکن اگر لوکل گورنمنٹس نے اختیارات لینے ہیں تو اس کے ساتھ ان کی کیپیسٹی بلڈنگ بھی بہت ضروری ہے تاکہ ان کے اندر صلاحیت ہو جس سے وہ اپنے اختیارات کو استعمال کر سکیں. کیونکہ اگر آپ ان کو ڈیوالو کریں گے، اختیارات دیں گے اور کارکردگی پہلے سے بری ہو جائے گی تو لوگ اس سے نالاں ہو جائیں گے. تو میرا خیال ہے کہ ایک بہت بڑا چیلنج لوکل گورنمنٹس میں یہ ہے جس پہ صوبائی اور
جی ویلکم بیک. آئی ہوپ سب نے چائے کافی پی ہے اینڈ یہ ریئلی ریفریشنگ فار دس اپ کمنگ سیشن. That will be really, really important. Why I'm saying this? Because we are joined by very distinguished guest speaker to give you a training and lecture on how we could accelerate green energy finance using green financing tools by Mr. Tahir Ali Sheikh, who is an executive director at NS Renewable Solutions in Karachi. And if I could just take this opportunity to give a little background of Tahir Saab. So he has almost 23 years of diversified national and international senior leadership experience in investment banking, private equity, debt capital markets, project and corporate financing, climate finance, and energy and infrastructure investments. Mr. Sheikh has started in financial services career in 2003 as a project officer in infrastructure finance division at the Islamic Development Bank, Jabbar. He then served at the Capital Management House, Behrend, and Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, Dubai. He has worked in Kuala Lumpur with Cap Asia, private equity fund manager as a director lending with a USD 287 million regional infrastructure fund and with CIMB Islamic Bank as a director and head Islamic advisory, Islamic wholesale banking. With such an extensive experience in the banking sector, I think he fits. We are really honored to have him here today to give you a holistic overview of how we could accelerate green finance. He is, if I could also add on some of his qualifications, that he holds a master in public administration from Howard University, and he's also a CFA charter holder. He's a mechanical engineer as well in bachelor's from University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore, and also has a MBA degree from Institute of Business Management, Karachi. And he has worked for SEVP and Group Head Investment Banking and Emerging Business at JS Bank. Now he runs his own startup, NS Renewables, which is developing renewable energy projects in Pakistan. And as we also heard from yesterday, working and looking into exploring the opportunity in geothermal for Pakistan. But I would like to now give a floor to Tahir Ali Sheikh Saab for his intervention. And let's clap and give a big round of applause for him. Yes, loud and clear. No, a little not loud. Yes. I'm sorry to interrupt, Tahir Saab. I think if the IT person can help switch on the mic of Tahir Saab.
So when I thought about having my remarks, I thought that I'll do it in a manner that all of you here at least have 4 or 5 takeaways, essentially. And I want you to focus on those, on the climate part. I will be bilingual in my remarks, given that most of the audience here is local, but I'll make sure that in my remarks, nobody misses anything if it is said in Urdu, right? So, can I have a pointer? Yeah. So, accelerating green infrastructure finance using green financing tools, right? The initial topic was energy, but I take energy as part of infrastructure. And also that when you look at the climate challenge, it is primarily the energy and transport are the 2 main sectors, as we'll go along and see. So that's why this is the heading. So let me start by first revisiting, going back to the bare basics, right? Why are we all here? Why are all the conversations on climate finance taking place? And what is it all about? It's an existential crisis. We don't hear that very often. It is a crisis that we have not had in any other form before. It has already started. Yeah, it has already started. We have very limited time to address it, and we have to act now. So when you guys look at this, apart from all the details, all the numbers, all the ideas, all the suggestions, always remember what we are talking about. So, and that is, in my view, a graph that really scares me and has been a motivating force over the years. When you really look, this mankind, the humankind, we in our world, it was always that the global carbon dioxide levels were between 200 to 50 parts per million. And when you really look at the later part of this, and they have now shot up at 412.5 parts per million. So from 1960 to 2022, now there is a very significant increasing trend. And we need to soak that in. Nothing being done in the world thus far. And I may sound like a bit of doom and gloom, कि जी क़यामत की निशानी है, but nothing being done despite all the conversations, all the COP26s, all in the world what is happening. जो है, this trend has not altered at all. So we have Kyoto Protocol in 1997. We have Paris Agreement in 2015. Nothing has changed. We have not been able to make a dent. So soak that in. It's like a big iceberg coming to you and you are in a Titanic and you are doing nothing about it. Yeah. And it is not something that we have yet to hit the iceberg. The world has already warmed by 1.1 degrees from the normal levels. It is already 1.1 degrees and we have started facing the consequences, right? So this has already started. There are extreme weather events that are happening. हमारे यहाँ flooding हो रही है, winter storms आ रहे हैं, forest fires हैं. How many of you recall that Pakistan had forest fires from other than this year? Balochistan had forest fires, Swat Valley had forest fires, northern areas had forest fires. So the crisis has already precipitated. At the global level, when you look at this, yeah, Stockholm Institute has had identified 9 planetary boundaries. We as human beings are already in breach of 4 of them. So we have crossed limits on them and we are already, those consequences have kicked in. So climate change is one, biodiversity loss is another, right? Food, and then again, the nitrogen and other chemicals, the balance of them is already distorted. Now, what the challenge is, what all the conversations you have, you're hearing about 1.5 degrees. Why 1.5 degrees? I'll touch upon it a bit. And that is that if we are able to restrict that further, this rise of temperature to 1.5 degrees, we can at least safeguard and avoid the catastrophic effects. This is very important to understand. We won't go back to business as normal. It is just that the crisis in which has already started, we are just gonna we are targeting to stop it. And we are not even on a path to this, right? So between 1.5 degree temperature rise and 2 degrees, so 0.5 delta of temperature rise can mean a lot of difference between dying coral reefs, the kind of biodiversity loss and whatnot. Just to give you an example, when you look at the heat waves, 1 in 50 years heat waves, which was in 1815 to 1900, presently now with our temperature rise, we are on a path somewhere here. The frequency of that is increasing many, many times, right? So that should give you an idea that for a hot country like us, and Pakistan is among the top 10 countries to be affected, we are on a path of destruction unless the world does something about it and we do something about it. So this is where we are. So this global warming projection is important. So there is, again, when you see there is a gap here. So this is where we are in our pathway. So current policies still take you to 2.5 to 2.9 degrees rise in temperature. No way near 1.5 degrees. This is another way of looking at it, what we need to do in carbon emissions by 2030 and look at the gap. So our current trajectory is there in carbon dioxide production, and this is where we don't want to be, that arrow, if you can see that part. So my first takeaway is this, and which all of you please remember, climate is just not some ordinary crisis. It's not like IMF crisis or a fiscal crisis, which are short terms, economies go up and down and all. It is a matter of life and death of the world as we know it. So when we design our projects, when we face our challenges and all, this is my first takeaway. And I wanted to re-emphasize it, even though it is going back to the basics of the severity and intensity of this challenge. So that's takeaway 1. Yesterday, I noticed also, because when there were recommendations and suggestions coming in, that while we have a lot of terms, floating around. People talk about responsible investing, talk about sustainable finance, whatever, right? And of course, here we are concentrated on green finance. So rather than going through all these terms, well, you guys can Google it now, right? So what I really want to touch is that we understand what we really mean by green finance, right? So even when you use a single term, there is no consensus on it. In fact, what United Nations Environment Program did, and this is a very good booklet, which you can download and have a look. They looked at the definitions and took a survey of it. And they covered a whole bit of ground. So they say that there are many working definitions, and depending upon the institution and the geography and their focus, there are emphasis changes. So for example, green finance can mean to attract private capital investments into green industries. It can be a strategic approach, looking at transformation towards low carbon and resource efficient economies. OECD says that it wants to achieve growth while reducing pollution and greenhouse gases. Then there is emphasis elsewhere on fostering low carbon, socially inclusive development. There are terms like clean, resilient, environmental management. Then again, some of the institutions relate these definitions to the growth, and then introduce like green and the financial products. So you have green credit concepts. It becomes part of green banking and Bangladesh Bank's guidelines, and also in our state bank guidelines. We talk about resource efficiency, and even now the state bank guidelines were essentially defines green banking as promotion of environmentally friendly practices. So you see a lot of jargon with different emphasis when you talk about green finance. Then again, the emphasis can be on the investment themes type. You can have energy, you have industry, transport, buildings, eco-friendly agriculture, nutrition, landscape, sustainable construction, renewable energy production, energy efficiency, education campaigns. Policies are also included. Biomass, onshore wind, by investment banks. I mean, they focus on that. Green products, materials, the bhattas, the brick kiln, manufacturing kilns, etc. Recycling, ecological restoration, and so on. Again, given that GIZ is here, the German Development Institute has a very good definition, which is, in my view, a lot encompassing, because it covers the policy side of it, public policy side of it. It includes the preparatory part and the capital cost of the projects. And it actually also has an ambit of the overall financial system. So look, I have just tried to define green finance, and I've spoken for 3 minutes and showed you like more than 20 plus definitions. So then you realize that what exactly is, again, green finance. So what exactly it is. So when you think about green finance, and this is where my second takeaway is, that you need to know what it is, it covers and what not. So simple way of looking at it is that it includes climate change mitigation and adaptation, but is something a bit more larger whole than this, and has other environmental parts to it. So your right diagram on your right is from the ADB kind of assessment of green finance. So you see the climate finance, and then the green finance kind of covers. So the bubbles here in blue are what is covered in climate finance, and then the green finance actually covers the other areas also, like waste processing, biodiversity, water sanitation, etc. Of course, climate finance covers renewable energy and all. So I think, and the reason I am emphasizing on this definition is because yesterday there were some comments and remarks and recommendations on waste management and some other concerns about the society in general, which may be either related to responsible investing, sustainable finance and whatnot, but generally don't fall in the ambit. So when you look at green finance, you need to understand what exactly it is and what it covers. So that's my second takeaway. So first takeaway is to remind that we are on a path of a crisis, on a doom and gloom. We are nowhere near 1.5 degrees centigrade. And the second takeaway is that when you think about green finance, what it exactly is, what it entails and not. These are the sectors and all. I'll just skip that, what it covers. So where is the problem? I mean, climate finance is increasing. So this is from the Climate Policy Institute. So if you look at last 10 years, a lot of awareness has happened. And in their latest report of 2021, $632 billion, that's a lot of money, was spent and invested in trying to tackle the climate challenge. That's significant, right? But where is the problem? We are way, way short of what kind of funds are needed to be mobilized to meet this challenge, right? So if you see that 632 on 2021 is there, so the estimate is that we need to have 590% increase in our investments if we are to have and restrict our planet to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So 590% means that you multiply it by 6, approximately 6 times this number. So it's around 3.6 trillion is the kind of number. And we have no will as a planet, as humankind, to put this kind of money. It's very interesting when you think about Ukraine war. One fine day you hear the US president kind of just creating $40 billion to kind of support Ukraine. Important, I'm not making a political statement, but when you look at as a planet, as a matter of life and death, naturally even a couple of billion becomes a big issue and a debate. So that's my third takeaway, that, well, a lot of money is required and we don't have the money. And especially for a country like Pakistan, that's a big, big, big problem, right? Just now, like in the previous presentation, the IFC slide, the estimate, the number was, I think, 197.1 billion of climate finance needs in the country. Now we are a country which is fighting for a 1 billion tranche from IMF. So just put things in perspective, right? So money is the problem, right? So yeah. Now this 632 billion, I think it is helpful for understanding. You may just kind of use it to understand. It's not really a takeaway, but I'll spend a bit of time on how it is these climate finance flows are gearing up, right? So if you really look at the big breakdown, this is again from Climate Policy Institute. This is a very informative infographic because it encapsulates a lot in just one graphic. So if you start at this side, which is the sources of funding, right? And these sources of funding are, this is the public sector, private sector, the kind of instruments that are being used. And these instruments, where are they going to adaptation? Are they dual use or mitigation? And then which sectors are these going on? So if you look at the breakdown, while these are global trends, it kind of gives you an idea that when you look at the resources within our country, what is the expectation from which organ or which institution of the country, right? So that's important. So if you look at globally, the public sector accounted for almost half, 51% of the money spent on climate finance, right? So and you have DFIs, bilateral DFIs, MDBs, state-owned financial institutions kind of giving grants, and then project debt, low-cost project debt, project level, market level debt also. So they are 51%. And the remaining part, 49% 310 billion is coming from the private sector. So it's kind of 50-50. So while there is a lot of emphasis though that, well, public sector is very scarce in resources, but generally when you look, they are almost half the driving force, and that's important to understand. There are things which government can do, which private sector is incapable of doing, and having an expectation to fill from the private sector to fill those shoes is again not really a practical way of looking at it. Of course, yes, excuse me. When you look at the financial instruments that are being used, of course, it's either debt or mezzanine, convertible finance, or equity. So these are the instruments: grants, low cost project debt, project level market rate debt, then of course equity. So how the money is flowing in that. Details are not, numbers are not as important, but rather the broad contours of where the money is going. These are the standard financial instruments, whether in finance, whether you are talking about climate or green finance, or even conventional. These are the tools which I'll come to back as I go in my later remarks. So here again, when you really look, debt, of course, given that when you look at projects, typically your debt to equity ratio is anywhere from 70-30 to 80-20, or even 60-40. Debt usually comprises the major part, and this is what this graphic shows. It is coming from both commercial FIs, government entities, MDBs, and on. And this is again where the equity flows are, right? Here, the corporations and households and commercial FIs are more into equity other than the DFIs, which you would expect, right? And of course, the most of the money is, and this is important. So that was the sources of money, what kind of structures they are flowing through, and where is it going? So when you really look, almost the major chunk, 90% is going to mitigation. So we are trying to stop the advent of climate change and doing that, but we are not really trying to adjust as much as we should. And we have, from the first takeaway, you realize that we are so far away of controlling this to 1.5 degrees. Maybe as policy, we need to put in a lot more effort and energy to adaptation rather than mitigation, right? Not that mitigation is not important, more the better, but the point here is that adaptation becomes a very, very serious concern. And what that means for all of us, especially all the youngsters here, we need to change our lifestyles. That's what adaptation is. It's our behavior, it is our way of living, it's how we use plastic bags, everything, the way we look at this, right? That's important. That should be ingrained in our minds, that adaptation is important. Of course, there is a little bit of chunk of dual usage, but that's besides the point. So adaptation is small, that's I've covered. Mitigation is, yeah. Here, now you see where the money is going. So money is going, when you look, energy is the major chunk, and transportation is, again, the second biggest chunk where the money so far is going. And rightly so. There are two reasons for this. One is that energy projects and these newer projects and mitigation projects, while it's good to feel it's, I mean, reducing greenhouse emissions is important, they are easier to do, relatively speaking, right? Because they are tried and tested. We know how to project finance a thermal power plant. Project financing a wind farm is very similar. Project financing a solar farm is, again, another thing, is very similar. So your financial models are the same. The investment bankers are used to it. The MDBs who have built dams are used to it for in 60s and 50s, and then supported thermal power plants, and IPPs in 80s and 90s are familiar with it. Easy to do, people failed, and then you can put your lot of publicity and that, look, you know, we are doing that, and rightly so. Not that they are not important, it's not fluff, but they are relatively speaking very easier to do compared to, say, for example, that adapting to a decreasing freshwater resource or a water crisis, or changing design of buildings, changing things like that, right? So that is there. This is just a definition annex, so I'll pass it on. So what this did was give you an overview of what kind of money flows are involved, who is providing them, where is it going in our climate emphasis, and what kind of sectors are there, right? So water, infra, land use, transport, and energy. So I'll pause here for a minute. So now I move towards my third takeaway. First being the 1.5 degrees, second being the understanding of definition of green finance, and just a broad overview of where the money flows are. So the sources we have already discussed, which include the various institutional mechanisms. This is a more stylized way of where the money is coming from. And of course, it can be public, private, it can be government, subnational development institutions, DFIs. From private side, it can be corporate finance or project finance, and it can be PPP, non-PPP, and then you have public and private companies. So these are the kind of sources which are kind of more covered in detail here, right? So in finance, you typically work with standard 3 asset classes, primarily debt, equity, and mezzanine. Guarantees are not really an asset class, but generally these are the main tools. They remain for the same for a corporation, whether you're talking about green finance or not, in general finance. By the way, let me revisit how you define finance. When you can, again, Google and have a lot of definitions, but what I found it useful, and for me, what finance is all about is that you have risks. Generally, finance is allocating those risks, and anybody who bears a certain risk gets compensated for it. That's your return, right? So if you are a company in a particular area, you take that risk. If the risks that you take on, you monetize those risks, even if it's a private venture and all. And the other risks, you try to give it to people who are better able to take on that risk and pay them, right? So essentially, this is what the entire finance is. And this is the kind of concept you guys need to keep in mind whenever you look at green finance, climate finance, in general, projects in general, or even corporations, or you analyze any company from a business angle, especially the economic students here, right? So again, to sum it up, finance is involved with return and risk. So the risks you take, you get compensated for it. The more risk you take, the higher the risk, the more compensation required. That is essentially the fundamental structuring tool that you have, right? Equity, I don't need to, it's basically an ownership in business. We have common shares. Public institutions typically invest in junior equity to absorb risks. Again, we have debts, which are of type of notes, bonds, loans, debentures, certificates, a whole slew of it. So I think we all understand what the concept of debt is, right? So for infra and green finance, essentially, this is the kind of universe of instruments. We have project bonds, municipal bonds, green bonds. We have loans, we have hybrid instruments, which are project financing, then balance sheet financing, and then we have a whole slew of capital pool vehicles, right, in the category. So you need to say that infra finance is probably the most sophisticated of financial structuring that comes into play because of the very nature of assets. They are long-term, they are capital intensive, they have multiple risks, they have multiple stakeholders, multiple institutions, private, government, public sector, private sector involved, and its risk allocation. Then guarantees and insurances are involved. So all these come into play, right? When you look at infra and green finance projects, of course, capital structure is important. And that depends on what the availability is. Why I'm giving you this a bit of background is because we'll discuss 3 or 4 products, which is primarily suited for green finance going down the line, right? This is to give you an idea of the kind of risks. I won't go into all the details, but the main point to emphasize is that the concessions company, which is the infrastructure project, has sponsors, lenders, contractors, operators, regulators, and all, and they take various kind of risks and how to address them. So this is what the whole structuring is about.
Discourage the usage of plastic or whatever.
I've noted that. I'll address that towards the end of my presentation. Second question.
Sir, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have few questions. We did not use the insulators for burning the garbage. We are burning the garbage on the landfill sites and through the garbage. We dumped a lot of garbage in the sea and increase the water temperature of the sea. And the other things, we do not do anything for the freshwater reserves, increase the freshwater reserve.
So the question is?
So the question is, because of your presentation, you say that we need to change our lifestyle. So what mechanism we adopt to avoid these things?
Okay, so this is related questions. I noted that down. Yeah, I'll address these lifestyle questions together. Anybody else?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
So my question is that, as we have seen that you have shared many information that was really great for our, but my main question is that here we have many policies over here about climate change, but one main thing is that political interference, like climate change projects are usually long term, and when government changes in Pakistan, usually many policies are stopped, as we have just experienced. So will it affect these projects too or not?
Okay, that's noted there. From 298, 300 billion approximately to 522 billion. We are expecting it, but climate bonds initiative expects it to cross 1 trillion this year, actually. So that should give you an idea the importance that the world is using on or paying the kind of emphasis on this too, right? So now I'll briefly touch the guarantees. I've mentioned passingly before that what they do is they are basically a risk mitigation tool, makes projects bankable, reduce probability of default, whether you're using green or not. Even conventional projects, guarantees do all these things. Every project financing has credit guarantees and whatnot. Insurance again plays a risk. So if we have a risk, essentially, which nobody is willing to take, what you do is you go and get an insurance for it, right? For example, to illustrate, I built funded a cement plant in Kurdistan in Iraq in 2008, and there was a political risk part of it. So you could get a political risk insurance. There is terrorism insurance, other kind of event risks that you, if you want to, weather-related events, you can insure projects depending on what the situation is. So essentially now I'll dig deep towards the kind of products that we go in day-to-day banking that are becoming green. And I think this is where it culminates. So we started at a very, very high level, 100,000 feet. Now we look at the specific financial products, right? So, and this is a global. So these things are essentially recommendation and ideas. These are currently not being practiced in Pakistan in banking, but generally elsewhere, these can be introduced with a bit of effort within the country. So when you look at retail banking, there are products like green mortgages, green home equity loans, green commercial building loans, green car loans, and green cards, not to immigrate to US, but basically credit cards, which kind of are related to green endeavors, right? So essentially the concept is this, that if you are, basically if your home is green, if you're using less energy, etc., they get cheaper products, right? And this is where the role of DFIs and other comes in. So if you can subsidize in a way some of these products, they become essentially viable for the banks. If I know that if I can get a mortgage at 13.5% in Pakistan, and if to real money, and this can be subsidized or in a form of not necessarily money, but taking a partial risk guarantee on a default, then it becomes a viable product for the bank to offer, right? So, on the retail side, these are the kind of things that are in play. On the corporate investment banking side, we have green project finance. Of course, this is where the major discussion is. Green securitization is in vogue now. For example, if you have a forest, cut the trees to make paper, but it is sustainable in a sense that the cutting rate is optimized such a level that the forest doesn't reduce in its size. So you can securitize the proceeds, that cash flows. So you have green securitization. Of course, green venture capital and private equity. Then we have green indices. So S&Ps, Moody's, and Fitch have developed these indices, which fund managers now essentially are climate related and green. So again, carbon commodities. I don't want to go into detail because of these, because when you have a lot of these new products, it's very difficult to retain to them. But the idea is to give you an overview that in our day-to-day products, right, like in retail banking, in corporate and investment, forest bonds are typically, the question is that who purchases forest bonds? So what happens is that how it works is that there are asset managers. So money from pension funds and all is managed by various asset managers. और उनका काम ये होता है कि basically they take this money and invest in debt instruments, in equity instruments, in alternatives, right? So if the mandate from the fund, या जो के pension funds हैं या दूसरी entities हैं या endowments हैं, if their mandate is कि जी आपने green चीजों में invest करना है, so that asset managers would do is, I want to buy bond, right? It has to be green. So if it is a certified green bond, and it has its risk known, its cash flows known, and then they will buy it. So these kind of products are bought by institutional investors. Pakistan, there are like, you have RFB investments.
Not by public.
Those are forest retail bonds. So there will be retail bonds. They are not very common as yet. But there are types of environment bonds which are Pakistan, because as yet our markets are not developed as yet. But in Malaysia issued an SRI, not a climate bond, where the output in which the kind of markup on the bond, and it was Islamic, was linked to the performance of the government schools, which were independently audited. So if schools performed well, you would get a lower markup as a holder, but if they didn't, you get a penalty markup, right? So there was incentives aligned.
Sir, तो पब्लिक ये फॉरेस्ट बॉन्ड्स और ग्रीन बॉन्ड्स हैं, अगर वो परचेज करेगी तो उनको इसके बदले में क्या मतलब प्रॉफिट या क्या इंसेंटिव्स मिलेंगे?
They are like ordinary bonds. You will get a when you
Return?
Yeah, you will.
What is green insurance?
I'll come to that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let me complete my talk before I take additional questions. Right. Last couple of minutes on challenges. Obvious challenges, but this is where the real bottleneck is. This is where you hit the wall. Especially forget about green finance. Generally, when you look at infra in general, there is limited sources of funding, right? The private money is not as much coming to Pakistan and many other developing countries, and that's where the problem is. Money is slow in coming. And then again, I'll take the second one. I think this is where GIZ, when you look at your recommendations, probably you need to look inward also, because all that talk of supporting, educating, capacity building is one thing. But when you look at the likes of KFW, the FMOs of the world, right? The DFIDs, the USAIDs and all, when you really look at a single project, that here, it becomes not much of choices there. So you go to the IFCs and the World Banks of the world. But for example, if you are doing an infra project in Malaysia and you want oh, IFC, I don't want to go to IFC. I mean, their environmental guidelines are way stringent than my Malaysian guidelines. If I'm meeting my Malaysian guidelines, am I not good enough? Right? And if my guidelines are not good enough, go MDB, World Bank, please talk to the government of Malaysia, right? And with your bureaucracy and your approval process, you're going to add 5 months to my project financing, right? I'm not going there, go there. Quantum solar, but they have bigger capital markets. Quantum solar is the largest sukuk that I issued, right? It was largest globally at that time, 1.5 billion ringgit. They didn't even go to the banks. They went to the capital markets, raised all the debt directly from the capital markets in the ringgit and just went on with the life. 3 months, right? Imagine raising money and having a financial close in 3 months, right? So something needs to give in the mindset of these DFIs and MDBs if you really, really want to bring change, right? You have to see how people sitting on the other side, well, their hands are tied if there is scarce money. So they will agree, but they are agreeing to your recommendations from your heart, that's an issue. And the last point is, when you look at green finance, and that's another takeaway I want you to internalize. We are all talking about solar. Has anybody thought, I mean, solar panels have a life of 20 years. Their performance degrades 2% a year. What would happen at the end of life? Is there, I mean, solars, we are talking, हम हर वक्त solar की बात करते हैं, कहाँ फेंकेंगे वो पैनल? क्या करेंगे उनका? किधर जाएंगे वो? ठीक है? We have put in so many wind turbines. The blade of a wind turbine is a very, very difficult substance to dispose of. ये fiberglass के वो जो होता है, it's a kind of a shaft of very small, grinded fiberglass, and then it is casted and all. And you can't just, it's so big and all. At the end of life, what are you going to do about it? And we have not at all internalized those disposal costs. या तो ये ना कि आज आप एक fund बनाएं, आप कहें जी पाकिस्तान में जो हर solar project panel बिकेगा, every solar panel that is being sold in Pakistan, some amount of money is going to go, and then there will be center in each city or whatever, where if I have solar roof and after 20 years, I decommission that in my house, I'll still have that house. I'm not just going to put in here CBC utha ke, ya the Karachi Waste Management Company would take it. I just go it there, and then because there are costs associated with it. Who's going to pay for it? Taxpayers? Are you going to throw it? Are you going to bury it? It's all kind of problems, right? So the environmental waste part is, again, probably one takeaway for you, is something for green financing projects. We have to internalize the end of life costs. I've hardly seen this discussion in so many seminars and conversations that I have attended. Okay, so my last remark, and this was my last slide, is that we have to think, if some of you have seen the movie Martian, right? Matt Damon gets stranded on the planet Mars. And what happens is, so there is a mission coming in, but his job is to, one way or the other, go to the spaceship that has come in to take him back. And he has to survive. And it takes 2 years for the ship to come in. He has not only to survive, he has to lift himself up and go and reach there. And in doing so, what he does is, it's single focus, right? In the end, even that, well, his spaceship is going, it kind of blows away and he's exposed to the radiation and all. And but that single focus, when you look at climate challenge, it is that kind of challenge that we face, right? I can save money on a small project or make sure that if 100% of projects I finance will succeed. But if I fail to meet this challenge, I'm toast, right? It's all useless. So I'll rather use 50 projects and have 5 projects fail, making mistakes, right? And take that risk, because I can't afford going more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And it is this realization, that acceptance, that I'm going to try new things. I mean that we as human beings are going to try new things, our institutions are going to try new things. And even if some things of them go wrong, we don't hang in the people who took the risks, but we try other things. So I think that's where I conclude my thoughts. So I'll take the questions and then try to answer them collectively. So thank you very much. Sorry, your mic is not on. I couldn't hear. Afterwards. Yeah, just.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good.
So thanks for the great presentation, and a lot of information that we have gathered through the session. And I must appreciate the level of effort you have put into it for this presentation, and highly appreciate it. So we have some online participants as well who have some comments, and if I could just mention a few. So we have a.
Can we start with the gentleman, then we go to online?
Yes,
yes,
please.
Yeah. Please, sir. Let me switch it on. Is it on? Please, go ahead.
Hello.
Ji.
Sir, I would like to ask a question that how would you see future of solar energy in Pakistan? And another question is okay, how you can manage hedging process in greenhouse, green finances.
Sorry, what is
hedging?
Hedging.
Hedging process. How would you combat this issue in green financing?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's take the first question, the future of solar energy. The way to look, I think it's we are nowhere even touching. I think the numbers were given in the presentation before me, but we were nowhere touching the potential that we have. One way to look at it is that the hottest parts of Germany, right, from where they get solar, are the coolest parts in Pakistan, right? Yeah. So if you just compare the quantum of solar energy there with all the cloud cover and all the long winters and what the Germans are doing, right? We are not even at the, any significant fraction of that, right? The thing with solar, especially in Pakistan, is there the challenges of the land use, but we have also a lot of land in third areas and in other areas in vicinity of even in Karachi, because where the challenge arises is if you have agricultural land, because solar farms take a lot of area, right? And you don't want to put crops under cover. The land use is an issue, but India is doing is they're putting solar panels on the canals even, right? Yeah, so to answer your question, I think rather than thinking it as a limiting barrier, we are even at a stage where we need to capture low-hanging fruit. The other part is that, for example, we have car parks. The roof can be solar, building roofs can be solar, the airport roofs can be solar, the hotels, right? So there are a lot of places even within the city, right? Our net metering usage is very, very low. So I think the potential is many, many fold. We can put a lot of numbers and estimate them in one way or the other, but I think the crux remains that we are not touching the true potential in any meaningful way. Your second part was hedging processes related to the green financing. See, the question is, when you talk about hedging, first you need to identify what risk are you trying to hedge. For example, if I'm a local investor, right, and I'm in Pakistan, I'm not really concerned about political risk, right? But if I'm a foreign investor and I have a universe of Asia and I'm looking at it, right, maybe political risk or an expropriation risk Not that I, as a Pakistani, would convince him otherwise, may want to look at that. So it is, the question is what risk you are trying to hedge, from which perspective, and at what cost. So generally what would happen is, for example, the currency devaluation risk. Currently, the state of global finances, you can hedge almost any type of risk at an appropriate price. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? And if you pay that price, it's your why, because that becomes the cost which needs to be paid from the cash flows, right? Does that become viable, right? So products are available. Even big banks can create customized products. Not that we have that tradition in Pakistan, right? But with the institutions I have worked, the structuring teams, I headed structured finance team. I mean, we can design it if some client demands it. But the question is what? That I'll give you one example. I invested bought a 13% stake in a utility in Kazakhstan way back in 2013, right? And at that time, tenge was 127 to a dollar, right? And the forecast for next 5 years was it's going to appreciate, right? So become 120, 118, 118, you know. So I ran my stress tested my models at 200. Yes, sab kuch galt ho gaya, ye ho gaya. In fact, some of my colleagues, in fact, my MD at that time kind of smiled at Tahir. Yeah, what are you doing, right? Then life happens, because private equity investments are like 10-year time horizon. Now, add another 7 years. This is one of the, and of course, we didn't hedge the currency risk, right? So, and it was expensive. It was adding, I did check, well, just out of curiosity, because when you are making the returns on that, you look at the default swaps and others in pricing, right? Tenge becomes like 320 to a dollar. So my $50 million investment, we exited it at a loss of 5 million. So we exited at 45. So that was one of the deals which we took a hit on. I mean, my other deals in that same portfolio were very, very good. So we were net off very better. That's why portfolios are important. But the question is, one, what risk you are trying to hedge? And do you have the ability to see how much in future, right? Yeah, but again, yeah, that's the question. And secondly, if I had hedged, the first 3 years the tenge was appreciating. Imagine I paying extra 1%, and every time I go to my committee and the board and say, Tahir, what are you doing? But then the things flip, right? So hedging is a difficult question to answer and requires a lot of sophistication. Thank you. Yeah. You had some online questions? Yeah.
There are some comments. One is about the presentation, that if it's accessible and we can share it, so you can let us know later. The other one is from Parco, Pakistan, who are committing to work on considering green financing on multiple projects.
Speak it closer to the mic. I can't hear you.
So of course there are some, there are not many questions, but comments instead, like from Total Parco, on they're exploring the ways. So they're looking for if the presentation can be shared, and also it's from the other partners as well. So if you allow us, or if we can.
So let me first answer the quick couple of questions that were raised. So I'll check them off, and then I'll take the comments and comment upon them. I think one of those are very overarching comment, how can we change our lifestyles? And this was also, there was a remark yesterday, okay, what can we do? The question is, since we all live in Karachi, it's not like we are very particular about water usage, right? आप टैप खुला छोड़ दें 5 मिनट खुला रहना आपका वो दिल heart starts missing a beat. I was in Islamabad in winter and staying in a guest house, and I opened the tap and it was freezing cold water. I called the guy and कहते जी सर आप 15 मिनट खुला छोड़ दें पर वो गर्म पानी आना शुरू हो जाएगा. 15 मिनट पानी खुला छोड़ वो पानी on then. But the point I am making is, do you think about electricity the same way? No, right? आप कमरे से बाहर जाएं, आप आधा घंटा दूसरे किचन में खाना पका रहे हैं, राइट? कमरे का पंखा चल रहा है. Do we think of electricity the same way we think about water? That's one lifestyle change, right? Just a very simple example. You leave it on, right? I've seen street lights on at asar ke waqt, right? Because people are, or even at 8 a.m., nobody switches them off, right? So lifestyle, when it comes to energy, is the way to think. Think of it as water, because this is something, as an analogy, we can relate. This is what I do. I tell my kids also, right? Think of it as a water tap on, right? That's just one example. The second remark is that I think we look at, and yesterday one of the persons in the audience asked the GIZ representative, what can we do? Well, we need to decide what we can do, right? The support from GIZ and the other people is very, very good people with very noble objectives here to help us. But the word is, they can guide us, they can teach us about things we are not aware of, but the onus is on us. So if we expect that they are going to come and teach us how to change our lifestyles, that's a totally wrong expectation, right? It shouldn't be, right? It is our lifestyle, it is our responsibility, it is our world, our home, our country getting hotter every day, right? Every passing day, right? Starting from, since I've lived abroad, my car has a roll of garbage bags in my glove box, because my kids, right, young kids, up to they are becoming teenagers. But you know, my daughter, 4 years, ice cream khayegi, wo karegi. Ek bag nikale, usme dalo. Whenever I go home, I put in the bags. How many of you have cars, garbage bags, spare garbage bags in your cars? I mean, it's not a personal question, it's a rhetorical question, right? So coming back to your remark on the lifestyles, right? Waste management, there was a question on incinerators, I think aapka question is that, right? That's a structural problem. Engr, I know, because at one time from outside, I also worked on that, trying to look at investing in waste infrastructure in Pakistan. I looked at Lahore and I looked at Karachi. A lot of work has been done on Karachi waste. The part of waste to energy is not the problem. That's easy technology, right? You get the waste, you know, you can, it's proven, it's the collection part. Karachi has 15 separate areas, and there is a whole informal ecosystem. There is a lot of, it is like करोड़ों का कूड़ा जो है ना, वो डेली का आगे पीछे होता है, right? It's a lot of money flow. So having it collected where there are mafias involved, आपके देखें, you go around, there's a young boy from lower income category is just scavenging, and the problem is so aggravated. आप उसको you take and put the bag. He'll tear out the bag, take out the bottles, and then do the to just flow around in the air. So it is not that. Engr actually did a feasibility on this. The government also sponsored it. In fact, AIIB is, in fact, I am aware, is in discussion and conversations with Karachi, the municipality, on how to address that. World Bank has put some money on it. So waste is on the radar, but it's not easy. In Lahore, they succeeded in giving it to the Turks and all. They did it very well, and then some political issues came in. But the thing is, I tried, when I came back to Pakistan a couple of years ago. I had 3 bins in my house. Plastic, all the plastic, I kind of rinse it and put it in clean way. But there was no entity. I actually called people to take it and see, is there an entity to pick it up? I was even willing to pay कि 400-500 रुपए महीने के ले लें, 600-1000 ले लें, उठा के ले जाएं. वो 1-2 को साथ किया, but नहीं, didn't. So that's a lifestyle change. So that's on waste management and incinerators. There was a question on political interference and policies. Not many people realize, I mean, we talk about a lot of doom and gloom about our country. If you take the political risk out, which is the expropriation risk and all, which is more outside in, there is a BMI report of 2014 that actually the power sector of Pakistan is at par in terms of regulation and policies and all as of Singapore. And it is way ahead because our power sector is actually tested. It's the positives because of the hubcos and all. The international guarantees have been tested. The arbitration mechanisms have been tested. The court cases have been tested. The English law has been tested. Our local lawyers are very, very familiar. If you go to the Mohsin Tayyib Alis and Heather Motos of the world and, or Dignams of the world, right? So they know it inside out, right? Very, very well. And by the way, that KG policies change ho jati hain, or in it, these policies in this regard have not changed since 1988, as far as I'm aware, right? And I have invested in several Asian countries in power sectors, and I know have a fair bit of comparative idea. In fact, power sector of Kazakhstan was much more riskier than the power sector of Pakistan. Even Bangladesh is much more riskier, right? So I think there was a question on green insurance. I think I had covered it in my slide. I can open that and share a bit of detail. It's more technical. I can take that bilaterally. So if you have comments, then anybody else has a question, I can answer that. Yeah.
I think we can take a
You have
question.
yeah, last way, because the time before, yeah, so I've taken way over my time, but please.
I think it was very useful. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tahir Sahab, this was very insightful. I have a couple of questions and I've tried to summarize them and you can answer it. So I belong to the consultant sector, consultancy focused on private sector. So you can sort of understand where I'm coming from. I would like you to sort of shed light from the global context, but specifically on the local context on these questions. Now we know that we have climate targets on a country level. I want to know if there are any mechanisms and instruments available where the country level targets trickle down to sectoral level and further to individual and respective corporate entities. Because since, for example, market and monetary share of entities from different sectors is usually known, and probably that can be proportionately applied to the investment and expenditure expectations from them in terms of climate finance. My second question relates to green bonds. So we talked about the WABDA bond, and I want to know if these are applicable and viable on a relatively micro level. So for example, are private entities and banks independently considering such initiatives? And my last question is also pertains to green insurance. And we know that climate risks have to be tackled definitely. So how is the banking and insurance sector integrated or in sync related to climate risks, if it is? So yeah, these are the three questions. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is regarding the trickle down targets from the government. You know, our government is smart, so we want to shift 30% to these, renewables and green. It was initially 10% of the target, right, of our vehicles. Now it's increased. When you look at these targets, and you read the policy, there is a line, if the money is available, right? Yeah, so of course, if the money is available. I mean, if we don't have money in, and what it does is kind of disingenuous in one way, but it is also reasonable in the other, because at one end, all the developed world says this much of capital flows, and they'll need to come up and they pledge in all these COPs, make sounding statements that will put 100 billion every year. But when you look at the second round GCF funding replenishment, 13 billion. I mean, like seriously, right? So I remember in Incheon in 2019, the environmental minister of Maldives said, guys, you are talking about details. My country is sinking. It's not going to be there in 20 years by the time you get your act together, right? Get serious, guys. I still remember the pleading, and it was so genuine coming from his heart. And I kind of tried, like, really empathize. It touched. So the second part of it is strictly down part is currently where the global state of affairs is, it is more to shifted towards the disclosure standard. So what the world, even in developed countries, is doing is a lot of work in Europe, EU. They take the green initiative there is you ask corporations to disclose their footprint. And then of course, there is step 1, step 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 targets, how much fuel they use, how much energy they consume, and then their upstream suppliers and downstream. So first part of that is disclosure, and anybody who adheres to first making them disclose and capture the data, then the step comes in is voluntary kind of acceptance of those targets. Then the third part is making it mandatory. So we are naturally far off, other than few multinationals because of their image. Hardly anybody measures, let alone discloses it. So that's the part. Okay, the green bonds at micro levels. I mean, Pakistan is very new in green bonds. The thing with green bonds is it imposes 2 extra costs. I think I didn't emphasize enough. One is, in order to have it green, you have to have at least a second party opinion, right? Independently verified to be accepted. This is the green bond guidelines, right? Currently, the capacity in Pakistan to have second party opinions is very limited. So there is again a scope for you guys to start your own firms, especially the Karachi University environmental science graduates, right? And get certified. So, but if I hire a like of a Cicero out of Europe or Sweden, then for one bond I have to pay $40,000, right? So if it's $1 billion issuance, that makes sense. If it is like a billion rupee issuance, probably not, right? And again, we have just toyed. WABDA did the green bond because the off-takers of those green bonds are a lot of international fund managers. So that is there. The green insurance, currently the product basis doesn't exist. Pakistan insurance has 2 problems. When you really look, forget about green insurance. Here, I have encountered fully Islamic structurings because I'm also in Islamic finance. All my infra and all this experience has been one way or the other Islamic, but today's discussion was not Islamic, so we didn't touch it. Even in Islamic finance, so for example, the wind farms, Foundation Wind Energy 1 and 2 are 100% structured Islamically, but their insurance is conventional. They didn't go for takaful because there is a global experience that takaful companies don't have the kind of balance sheet to take project finance risks, right? And there have been in Middle East and other, even if you try to insure it back end through the Lloyds of London, doesn't work, right? So reinsurance problem, yeah, exactly, yeah. So because in the end, you have to reinsurance and go back to the likes of Lloyds of London or Munich Re and others, right? You can't. So that market for now doesn't exist. We have very shallow capital markets and institutions. That's the reality.
Thank you so much, Tahir Saab.
I think I can take the last question, but actually let's conclude the session, right?
Please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. You can ask the last question.
Okay.
Could somebody else, please?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
My name is Mohammad Junaid. I'm from Karachi University. I'm a student of second year.
जी.
सर मेरा सवाल ये है कि हम अभी तक फ्यूल और सोलर पैनल पे ही हैं, ठीक है? हमारे पास जो है वेस्ट वाटर का जो स्लज होता है, एक ऑर्गेनिक मैटर में भी होता है, इनऑर्गेनिक मैटर में भी होता है, ठीक है? उसका जो स्लज निकलता है उसे हम डंप कर देते हैं। पहली चीज़ ये, उसमें ऑलरेडी इतनी गैसेस वगैरह होती हैं कि उसको बर्न कर देते हैं और फिर उसका जो जितना भी पॉल्यूशन है वो सारा एटमॉस्फेयर में भी जाता है और हमारी पॉल्यूशन में भी इजाफा करता है, ठीक है सर? देन सेकंड, सर अगर हम इसी स्लज को यूज़ करें तो हम इससे मीथेन गैस प्रोड्यूस करवा सकते हैं, तो इसमें ना हमारी इतनी कॉस्ट लगेगी और ना मतलब पॉल्यूशन फैलेगा। तो सर आप अपना ओपिनियन दें कि क्या है?
I think the issue is the economics of it, right? यूजुअली अगर आप देखें, जो मैंने प्रेजेंटेशन में कहा था, अगर आप वाटर वाला सेक्टर और वो देखें ना, और वेस्ट ट्रीटमेंट, उसमें पब्लिक सेक्टर इन्वॉल्व है, उसमें प्राइवेट सेक्टर मनी इज नॉट फ्लोइंग। रिमेंबर द स्लाइड्स, ठीक है? एंड देयर इज अ रीजन फॉर दैट। वन इज वेस्ट वाटर treatment is usually a low margin output, and then to be economic and to put the kind of capex you require, you need significant quantities of that. You need to capture that, and then it's not ki wo everything is dumped into it and then you can take that sludge. It has to be, it is one thing to have industrial waste, it is one thing to have the organic waste, it is another thing to have biohazard waste, right? So just because here what we do is we dump it together and you want it to be treated, okay, well. The methane part and its landfills generate a lot of it. But again, the question arises is the funding, the cost, and the kind of returns on it. And currently, and of course, the collection and who has the rights of those land fills or uska wo jata kahan hai, right? Currently, there is a lot of informal economy around it. That's one problem. Secondly, the scale and itself and the collection mechanisms is another problem, right? और फिर उसको करना है स्केल पे कि जी वो उससे viable economic profitable काम हो सके, it's another, right? So I think when you really study it, there are so many barriers to that. The concept is good, I agree. Making it happen is the devil in the details. That's the problem.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tahir Saab. I would like to request all the audience to give a round of applause. I think it's one of the best presentations we have ever had, for a very deep insight of how the situation looks like, how the financial mechanisms and instruments and tools that exist globally could help countries adapt, and how it could be translated for Pakistan. So how the Pakistan could increasingly explore the innovative financing mechanisms, leveraging on development partners, private sector, investors, or international capital markets, and of course, to cater one of the biggest and gravest challenge of climate change we are facing, having an impact on all the services for human and their livelihoods. So thank you so much once again, and thank you so much to the audience and the participants. I would just like to give a floor to Hartmut for the final words, and then probably to Engineer Jabbar for closing.
Thank you so much for giving me last time the floor. And before telling the final words, this great presentation from you before with the best moderator also on my side provokes me also to provide a few comments on what was said here today. And I try to make it very quick. The first thing is I like to clarify once again our role, because I was here seen as coordinator. We give you all the problems. No, we support Pakistan in facilitating things. We are talking about ownership. We are partnering. We are working in partnership. We are not taking up all the problems and financing them, but we do our best where we can partner. And I'm working here with a GIZ contract, but for the whole German Development Corporation. So it's not GIZ, it's the BMZ in the German Development Corporation. I want to make a second comment concerning climate finance. This is a very, very contradictory theme, because we do not have any definition about climate finance. For instance, we have no definition if UNDP is paying hundreds of flights to the COPs, if this is counted as climate finance or not, or if in African countries UNDP is giving hundreds of per diems for people who are participating in workshop. Is this or is it this just the money for putting something in place? So it's very contradictory. The Green Climate Fund is a very small portion of climate finance. We have some estimations about climate finance from 2018, which is not 100 billion US dollar, but 80 and something billion. So according to that definition, we always arrive there, but there's no consensus on the last definition of this. Then I like to make some comments on adaptation mitigation. climate finance is mostly on mitigation. We are looking more for climate finance on adaptation. On the other hand, we should be aware of one thing, what the last assessment report of IPCC pointed out. We are running against the limits of adaptation already in many, many fields, and the costs are getting higher the more the warming is going on. So although we need much more financing for adaptation, we need a strong mitigation, and without mitigation, we cannot stop climate change at all. Let me very quickly also look on the other remarks, yes, concerning climate insurance. We from the German Development Corporation will most probably start very soon with a big project on climate insurance, which is trying to provide something like an umbrella over all the risks. We will see how it works. This is, as climate finance, a very new subject which is currently developing. I also like to come back to the waste issue. You're very right in pointing out to one subject we are discussing already since 15 years, what to do with all the waste of solar panels. But we have to consider one thing which is very important. We have the same problem when we're talking about coal power plants. We have much more the problems when we're talking about nuclear power plants. So we have to think about what is more important. We have to do quickly very quick decisions not to let the earth warm further. So we have really to hedge the different risks one against the other, and on the same time establish an infrastructure and technologies for waste recycling. This is the only way we are going, because according to my knowledge, the risk with coal power plants are not less, and the risk with nuclear power plants, even since 50 years, are quite serious and not solved at all. And of internalization of external costs, this is a subject which we are dealing with since 15 years very much, but it has never become mainstream until now. Now in Germany, we have a party in the ruling which very much tries to go into this direction. We were talking about the potential of renewable energies in Germany compared to Pakistan. I think Pakistan is running very fast in the direction of getting more renewable energies. Here, the potential is 3 to 4 times higher. In Germany, we have in the power generation more than 50% of generation by renewables already. And I know we are involved here in 2 projects in the renewable energy sectors where we have the grid integration, net metering, and so on. I think Pakistan is performing very well in this. And sorry for this many comments, but I was provoked to really provide them out of the knowledge I have myself. I like to end this with some closing remarks. Thanking you very much for your attention, for your discussion, for your contributions. I like especially to thank Sustainable Development Policy Institute very much for this great cooperation, which is a starting point of, no, not a starting point, which is an improvement of our cooperation, which started already in September last year. And we will continue with this cooperation, and we will use each other's force so that we will proceed in the subject, make awareness in politics, bring the best proposals for solutions, and get the policymakers on board, do a lot of awareness. Thank you so much. Also, it was nice to be in Karachi again.
Thank you so much. I would also request Jabbar sir for a few words.
So Zara has asked me to say a few words. So let me see if I can really contain myself. I would say, being a member of Board of Governors of SDPI, I think I should also not be on the disclaimer side, but on the claimer side, that I must also I'm just say few words, like we always say, vote of thanks. But in addition to that, I think in my mind, a lot of things are just now like a roller coaster are just going around. I heard him, I heard Tahir. But I personally believe that, for example, our friend coordinator, we should be thankful that he has been catalyst in organizing such a august, I must say, gathering with SC. But more or less the approaches, you see, have to be also customized. In most of the seminars, when I see the partners, our partners, you see, who are really very good, who have been helping us, who have been trying to see if we can become efficient. Our main problem in this country is that we need to address the issue towards correcting or elevating our efficiency. For example, in the green banking guidelines and all that, I personally see that the money in Pakistan or the financing guidelines or the structure of the financing must first of all proceed towards correcting what we call totally incorrect positions we have. For example, I'll give you K Electric. We are sitting in Karachi, industrial hub, commercial hub, whatnot. In the definition, we also met to have a book of definition of industrial hub, commercial hub for Karachi. You see, the most inefficient power company. I have been proponent of privatization. I mean, when K Electric was being privatized, I was the one who was talking with the General Pervez Musharraf, who was everything of Pakistan. Down to 27, 28%. थोड़ा सा आप लोग समझने की कोशिश करें, मैं आप लोगों को समझाता हूँ। उसमें क्या होता है कि उर्दू में भी बात कर लूँ, इंग्लिश में इनकी वजह से करना चाहता हूँ। I just say, let me see if I can keep the balance of, twin language, like we call twin deficit in this country. So let me keep in English because you should also understand. Thank you. K Electric, actually, the three major sources, they are the most inefficient plants we have been recommending. I've been, I must say, very much associated in trade politics for the last 25 years. And we have been recommending that all these three plants must be closed immediately. Why it should be closed immediately? Let me put things in simpler way for your understanding, because it also involves some of the jargon words in the power system and electrical engineering. K Electric is purchasing and producing electricity of 25 to 27 rupees from these power plants. And we have been always asking them, asking the NTDC and the government of Pakistan, stop these plants, supply them electricity, which is at the cost of 7.5 rupees in the basket from the NTDC. But they are not doing it, you see. Another thing is that K Electric, other problems are that these people have also a lot of issues on the fuel adjustments. Now the fuel is rocketing. So you will again see the fuel adjustment cost monthly and all that. So I was trying to work it out. 32 to 34 rupees it will cost you. They were raising 7.9. So every simple Pakistani thought 7.9 rupees. But when you just accumulate it into the table, put in the software, I have got that. So I was working out 11.93. So how come you can tell people 7.93? Anyway, so maybe I think our coordinator is here, FIZ program is here. You must think, first of all, the ills and odds. This green, financing must first of all correct our situations. In Pakistan, I will not go into details. There are 9 power plants which must be closed immediately. They should not work. They are not only inefficient, but otherwise on the side of the climate change and all that, they have all adverse contributions. They have not been put to the heat rate audits. I have been asking for the last 11 years in NEPRA. that please subject them to heat rate audits. So I think whatever you have, if you can manage it, you can improve it, the efficiency for a better use, for a better economic dynamics. I think that should be our strategy, in my personal opinion. Now, in the morning session, I was telling in Pakistan, our donors, I have been talking to USAID, DFID, and so many institutes, you see. I've also in FPCI, we have a lot of FED, TIZ, so many things. I'm saying, look in Pakistan, the gas metrics, you see, 800 MMCFD methane is going in the air. Isn't it our priority of green finance banking? Let's say, you see, isn't our priority that we should not let these gases, I mean, the way Tahir said that we have to adopt to a culture that when we go out of the room, we must close the, fan. But now let me assure you that when I was 20 years back, nobody would turn off the gas burner, but now people are turning off the gas burner because it is becoming too costly and cheap. So these all, I would say, I mean, say things, first of all, should be taken account of. You correct the things first. Let the financing start from there. Now, for example, Tahir was telling about, I mean, say so many instruments of banking. Believe you me, even our, insurance companies are hardly living up to the expectations of bare minimum good products to sell in the market. We have cases in the insurance and banking ombudsman and so many things that they are not even people, 3 to 4% people have problems in getting compensations. So these instruments, very good. So if we are borrowing, you see, the methods and practices, it is good. But first of all, let's see in the cascading effect, which one to start with. That is my, you see, always concern. Now 632 billion going to 1 trillion rupees. In budget of Pakistan 22-23, I was just checking climate. So I saw 6 billion rupees. Then I was checking what is the size of the salaries against the development aspect. It's just 20 to 80. So I said these things inherently are existing. Probably some of the things I don't expect that our partners would help us. We have to help ourselves. But some of the issues, for example, concessional provisions, concessional financing, green financing, must also come to the rescue of putting things in order. 41,000 megawatt. In Pakistan, what is going on? I think I tell you very interesting thing. The political energy and political energy of Pakistan is like that. It is like a cart before the horse. We have 41,000, we claim, megawatts. You will go on different websites. And you cannot evacuate more than 21,000 comfortably without at the loss of 9%. You have losses of 20%. Is it not green? Science of green energy should go to address these issues. Cart before the horse, and we have such a big government, and we have such a big fight amongst the political parties and all that. I don't want to go into these details, but probably I think these things also merit to be considered by our, knowledge-based partners. You see, also Tahir should be here somewhere around. You see, also very learned speaker. I really like this presentation very much. And Zara's presentation was also very good. Let me appreciate. So I actually, Hina, I see. Who's Zara? Is someone else? Okay. Okay, sorry. Somebody was inviting me. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me correct your name. Okay, Hina. So she was also good. Even I was asking her to send me those presentations. So let me try to now come to the conclusion by saying few words as a vote of thanks. So, Hina, thank you very much. Being so good, and all the time our partner was writing. That shows how vigilant he was. He was writing and he was taking notes, though I was not so smart like him, but I was also writing anyway. And Tahir's presentation was wonderful, really. He talked about Kazakhstan and all that. I happened to go in Kazakhstan's water sanitation, solid waste and all that 20 years back. So I remember Kazakhstan also so well. But then one thing I tell you, the implementation and all that, the problem is that in our policy dynamics, there is no accountability in this country. For example, 20 years back when I was going to China, So every next year when I'll go, I'll just think, oh, is it Beijing? Same Beijing I came last year. And Shanghai, I'm saying 20 years back, I would like Karachi more than I like Shanghai. But today, if somebody tells me you get a nationality of Shanghai, I will prefer to get the nationality also. So I'm saying we are on the implementation side, accountabilities, and the mechanism of really putting things to ensure that optimal utilization of not only knowledge-based services, but also money is ensured. This is our main problem. You people, some of you people who are very young, I would think that continue, I would say, with advocacy, try to find, I would say, more people who think like you. And if you will be influenced by my talks, even by 1%, I will think I will be a successful ender to leave this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jabbar sir, for joining us this morning and enriching us with really useful information, and we are highly grateful. Thank you to all the participants who have been joining for the last 2 days. So today we have come to conclusion, but we'll stay engaged, like I said. So let's keep each other informed, keep in touch for future events as well. And I hope to see you next time. The lunch is served outside. Please take lunch and I'll see you next time. Thank you.